Okay, so the title of the presentation is Security Testing, Where Are We Now? And I have to admit straight away it's impossible to be scientific about where we are now because security and secrecy kind of overlap and get confused. And most organizations don't want to tell you about the mistakes they've made. So they try to keep it quiet, and they do a pretty good job of that. But there are consultants working in the field who share findings. There are research studies, and there are anonymized gatherings of companies that do share information. And then there's situations where things go so badly wrong, the companies have to reveal the breach to the wider world because of statutory compliances and the law stepping in. So the figures vary in terms of percentages of this being a problem or that, but generally all the figures can be reconciled, and they generally agree in all respects. And the main headline is that the attackers are winning, we're losing, and the rest of this presentation really is about elaborating on that statement. I don't know if anyone is the right age generation to recognize all your base up belong to us. Does anyone remember that? Yes, okay. Zero wing, or whatever that was it, yeah. That was an internet meme in the 90s, basically meaning kind of gotcha. So why is that happening? Well, the World Wide Web, which the first web server went live in December 1990, so 24 years ago next month, and it was designed by, it was designed to provide access to scientists at CERN for viewing static HTTP pages, and it was not designed at all for internet banking or online shopping, etc. So when Sir Tim Berners-Lee put this live, he wasn't thinking about those things, and it was vulnerable everywhere. And attackers quickly worked that out. And as commercial applications went onto the web, they found out all kinds of ways of getting in. And this is just a very small handful of those, such as SQL injection, XML injection. You may not know these terms. I didn't know them until a few years ago. CSRF, cross-site request forgery, XSS, cross-site scripting. These are other forms of injection, but just to explain a little bit, cross-site scripting is generally where a client browser trusts the web server too much, and that web server has now been infected by malicious code and is either storing or reflecting malicious code, or it's putting malicious code into the document object model. Cross-site request forgery is the opposite direction. That's when the web server is trusting the client browser too much, and yet that session has been hijacked by a malicious person. And you can put defenses in place for things like cross-site request forgery. In fact, you can put defenses in place for everything. The basic defenses can now be worked around by good hackers. So you have to put very good defenses in place, and you have to design and code and test those defenses. And if you've got something very valuable, you might have good defenses here, cross-site request forgery. But if you've even got one cross-site scripting vulnerability, they can leverage that to create cross-site request forgery, steal the session token for that and get in, and then ride your session in. And if it's combined with something like clickjacking, you might be seeing a screen that you think is the web application you're dealing with, but actually there'll be a transparent child screen laid in there as well that you cannot see. And even something as simple as a single click of a mouse could be enough for them to then start using your tokens to transfer money out of your bank account. And some of these attacks, when you look at them, they're the work of evil geniuses. They're so ingeniously clever. They should be hanging in a gallery. They're like the modern Leonardo da Vinci's and Michelangelo's are coming up with the original attacks like this. They're very, very clever. But they do horrible things, and really nasty stuff happens to innocent people. But so the bad guys have got the evil geniuses, and if we're the good guys, we've got the idiots. Because this is the 2013 25 most popular passwords. And we know this is true because of the hundreds of millions of accounts details that are stolen every year. They come available on the web, and these can then be combined and aggregated, and we can see that these are the top 25. So for the first time ever, in 2013, password was knocked off the #1 spot as a password buy 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which, you know, how are they going to get that one? Adobe 1, 2, 3 is here, and Photoshop there, because they had a huge hack in October last year. So that bumped them up the list. But if you think of the number of administrators there are in the world compared to normal users, it's shocking that admin here is the number 12 most popular password in the world. So, you know, this is we're kind of in a post-password world. People have got password fatigue, and that's just one small aspect of security that's going wrong because we're working with people who don't care about security. And who's doing the hacking? There's criminals. The criminals have an organized supply chain now. They're far better organized than they were a few years ago. There'll be researchers looking for vulnerable applications, looking for open port 80. They then pass that information on. They sell it on to skilled hackers who will then go and get into your system, extract the valuables, and then they sell it via Bitcoin exchanges to the lower in the supply chain criminals, who will then go out onto the street using white plastics, etc., to obtain goods by deception and take money from ATMs and use the internet to shop and so on. And espionage is very much on the rise. These guys are extremely good, very tough opponents to go up against. Hacktivists are not so much of a worry. They get a lot of publicity because that's what they want. They're politically motivated attackers who want attention, but their skills are more amateur than, certainly much more amateur than espionage. And just to show I've still got it, the Lulz, that's what the youngsters say for the fun of it. You know, so the kids on the street would be saying, doing it for the Lulz. Now, the average breach, according to the Ponemon Institute, was 7.6 million last year. I think that's skewed towards their sample, which had some large American businesses in it. I think in the UK, a small business would be looking at about £90,000 for an average loss, give or take £25,000, which is still, you know, a fair amount of money. That'll be enough to pay your bar bill next week, Paul Gerard, in Dublin. You know, if you just give me your hotel room, don't worry about it. I'll take care of the rest. In this Reuters screen grab, they were saying almost every company has been hacked and won't know it until 6 months after the breach, according to one expert. But let's just, we can break that down a little further. Just looking at a couple of types of attack. On the left side of the screen here, point-of-sale intrusions. It takes some time to prepare an attack, or a lot of the time actually they're just modified versions of known attacks. They're obfuscating the attack so it's not recognized by the defending systems. But once they execute the attack, 51%, more than half, are into your system within seconds, and another 36% within minutes, if you're dealing in point of sale, so that's kind of like retail organizations, pubs, restaurants, petrol stations, and so on, anything with a point of sale terminal. The exfiltration, i.e. the export of your valuable data, 88% is gone within minutes. So like a human can barely react in time to do anything about this. The system hasn't been prepared to defend itself. You've lost already. Some of the stuff takes a little longer. 11% take weeks to compromise the system. That's because they're after something very valuable. They're prepared to be tenacious and persistent to get in there because you've got something they want, and they'll take their time to get it. And that's where the exfiltration being 11% would apply as well. But discovery takes weeks, the point of sale. 85% take weeks, and 13% months. 1% take years. This research was done by Verizon, and I have no idea why. There's such a great piece of work they did, why they had this column of never. I can't understand how you're ever going to have anything greater than 0 on the attacks that are never discovered. Another example here is web application attacks. Now this is the biggest area of worry, web application attacks. Everything's shifted to the right a bit here. It's taking them longer to get in, but 95% are in less than a week. And the other 5%, they're going for investment banks. They've got a lot of money and very good defenses. Exfiltration, again, it's taking longer because they don't want to alert the intrusion detection systems. A good intrusion detection system will be looking for unusual traffic leaving the network. It's not only defending against things coming in, it's looking what's going out. So they'll establish usually a pattern of like a small amount of data going out at a certain time of day, let the intrusion detection get used to that, and then build on it until they've taken all your data. But there are some advanced persistent threats that do clever things, like they'll register a new domain name every hour and then start exporting your data as fast as they can to that domain address, and then By the time you've noticed it, they've registered a new domain, and it goes from somewhere else in your system to the new domain, and it goes on and on hourly, indefinitely, and very hard to predict where it's going to come from next and where it's going to go to next. Very hard to stop. And then there's discovery. Most of these are taking months. So 41% take months. And a lot of damage is done in that time. But then from the discovery point, the containment can still take days, weeks, or months. And that's a really expensive way of dealing with the problem. It's a very inefficient use of money to wait until the damage is done and then try and find the vulnerability, test the fix. Does it create a new vulnerability? Does it really fix this vulnerability? Apply it, and then once that fix is in place, you've then got to patch up all the damage. You've got to fix your data, and you've got to find a backup that hasn't been contaminated by the attackers, who will have created, for sure, administrator accounts that they can use to activate as soon as you think you're secure again, and they'll just relaunch the attack. And an example I want to talk about here is Target. I mean, there's unlimited examples you could give, but that was just coming up for its first anniversary. Here, an email was sent not straight to Target. It wasn't an attack directly on Target. Pardon the pun. They knew Target's defenses were quite good, so they went to the heating and ventilation supplier, a third party who had access to Target's domain to submit invoices. But that heating and ventilation supplier had been given too much access. They were given access to the whole domain. And an employee at the heating and ventilation company opened an email that had been sent from someone he thought was a trusted third party, but was actually an attacker. It downloaded a script, went through their system down to Target's system. Like most retail organizations, it's got a hub and spoke design, so it went out from the hub to every point of sale in their thousands of stores. It then installed itself in it installed RAM scraping software inside the RAM chips, inside the point of sale devices, because that's the one place the transaction's in the clear. Everywhere else it's encrypted. And it then started harvesting all the card information that was being used to pay for retail purchases. And it gathered millions, over 100 million accounts in the final tally. And it sat there for a while, didn't do anything, and then gradually started to exfiltrate the data. Many mistakes have been made in the design and implementation and the coding of the systems at Target. Some of them might be forgivable, but at this point they dropped a really big bollock. There's a system by FireEye. It cost them $1.5 million to look for exfiltration, and it actually detected something was happening. And an employee in Bangalore noticed the alert, sent an email to the headquarters in America and said, there's unusual activity, it looks like exfiltration. And nothing happened. They didn't do anything. They just sat back and allowed about another 3 weeks of exfiltration to occur. And then, like about 90% of point of sale intrusions, it was not an internal system detected it that was actioned. It was the law enforcement agencies came to Target and said, you know what, there's a colossal amount of debit and credit card fraud going on in America, and the one common factor is they've all shopped in Target. Something wrong here. And that caused the alert to be raised. And like most retail companies, they didn't admit the full problem to start with. They start saying, oh, it's just a few accounts, and then it's a few more. But more and more information was gathering, investigative journalists were finding out what's happened. So, caused a 46% drop in sales. The cost to the banks alone is $172 million in issuing all the new cards. By the time all the lawsuits are settled, it'll probably be $1 billion cost to Target. The CEO and the CIO and many others lost their jobs. And that's just one example. We could talk about this all day, these kind of things. Here's more examples. Angela Merkel, it wasn't 6 months for her, it was 9 years probably her phone was hacked, and it could have been, she could have gone to her grave and never known her phone was hacked if Edward Snowden hadn't blown the whistle. And there's a school of thought in Germany should go back to using typewriters because IT is hopeless. IT security is hopeless. Let's just start using typewriters, and the NSA can't watch us. Bitcoin's used in a lot of criminal transactions by hackers, but it's not immune to hacking itself. Several Bitcoin exchanges have been hacked. It's not backed by any central bank, so it could be undermined and destroyed itself. JP Morgan, fascinating hack there, but since I don't want to become between JP Morgan's lawyers and the Russian FSB, if they are involved, then you know, I won't say any more about that. Heartbleed was so high profile, it was in the news the general public heard about earlier this year. But these attacks are not just dropping out of the sky. As a tester, you should be able to see them coming from a long way off, because you're seeing system use cases of what the customer wants to do with the system you're building and testing. But you're not seeing misuse cases that prevent the hacker from doing what they want to do with the system. You probably know that your developers are not all following a standard set of secure coding guidelines. They're just doing what they want. And it only takes one of them to not be developing securely to blow everybody's work. According to HP, $46 billion was spent just on the defense, not on the costs of the damage done. On the defense, $46 billion spent on cybersecurity defenses last year. Gartner come up with a different figure, $67 billion. I would, by instinct, go with the HP figure. And yet, despite all that spending, which is a growing amount of spending, there's 20% more breaches, and the cost per breach has risen 30%. And this chart just shows us the change in the nature of attacks. The threat actors here, although the total number of attacks is going up massively all the time, financial is slightly in decline due to the increase in espionage. But here, the people doing it for the lulz, they're almost insignificant. The people doing it for fun are down there at the bottom. It's espionage and financially motivated people, because most people get out of bed in the morning to go to work for money, not for political reasons or anything like that. So although politically motivated hackers get publicity, it's the ones who want the money. The economically driven hackers are the ones that are far more dangerous. And here we can see that something like insider misuse is a pretty steady low level of the problem, but social engineering is rising fairly steeply. Criminal software, malware is a big problem, and hacking has got practically a 45-degree slope over the last few years. And you know, if your businesses had a turnover growth like that, you'd be very pleased. This is all bad stuff, and this is a golden age of hacking. And we could make it go the other way, 45 degrees down, decline, but you'd have to actually start caring about security and testing for it. And if it goes on like that, in a few years, everything everywhere will be hacked. People will just completely give up on security. Just say, oh, well, you know, we have no privacy, we have no secrecy, there's no security, the hackers have won, the war's lost. Until the day ISIS take control of America's nuclear arsenal, and then it'd be like, well, why didn't anybody do anything? Why haven't we been doing something about security? This is slides showing, it's kind of like a return on investment picture here, that most attacks here, most incidents where they get as far as being noticed that they've done something, they've caused some harm, they've had some success, they don't actually succeed in compromising data as much as some other attacks. So insider misuse, 18% of incidents, but only 8% of actual data breaches. Physical theft of computers, laptops, and so on, 14% of incidents, but due to things like encryption of the data and passwords and so on, people with good passwords, the few of them, it's less than 1% of actual data breaches. But some other things stand out here. Point-of-sale intrusions, less than 1% of incidents, 14% of breaches. Skilled attackers making good progress. Espionage, 1% of incidents, 22% of data breaches. These people are good. Not in the nice, good way. I mean, they're good at what they do. 6% of incidents, web application attacks, 35% of breaches. This is the biggest problem area. And web applications are the kind of area we generally work in, and we really should be doing more to defend them. They're getting in because they're good, and they're getting in there because we're bad. And it depends very much on what industry you're working in. So for guys like me who like to think of ourselves working in the information industry, our biggest problems here are web application attacks and crimeware. But if, say, you're a recruitment consultant, I guess you'd be the next best thing to a real estate agent, and for them, 37% is insider misuse. Who would have thought? Estate agents can't be trusted. Okay, now this is the most important part of my presentation. I've used an old OSI model here, the open systems model, to show that under the old stack, the transport layer, layer 5, actually got a mention, and the application layer, level 8, had a mention specifically. Now, the TCP IP model on the right, you're right, they don't get named specifically, but the principle is still true, that here is where the network security is operating. Up there is application security. And if you're only relying on network security, you've got a big problem. And when I was younger, I thought that people who did the firewall stuff, the network, the security teams, most places I've worked, that is all they do. They do the firewall, they do the intrusion prevention system, they do the intrusion detection system, they're monitoring it, they're configuring it, constantly updating it. They're not working in web application security. Those tools do try to do some things to protect the applications, but it's not their area, and they struggle to do anything. They basically work on pattern matching of known attacks. They look for scripts in a message that they can see, oh, that's a known attack. But they can't see inside a HTTPS message. They can only see the stuff that's in the clear. And attackers would obfuscate this. They change them. There's thousands of new attacks every day, varieties of old attacks often, but they disguise them so that these detection systems don't spot them. The network security might also use anomalies. They might put something into a message into a virtual environment, let it run, see if it's trying to do something that looks dangerous. If they suspect it, they might then pass it on to a human to decide if it's a new type of attack. But that kind of stuff really slows the traffic down. So you can only sample for that sort of problem, and the more traffic you've got, the smaller the sample will be. So the message I'm saying here, this is really important, is we have to work much more on web application security, because the perimeter defense, much like old castle walls, has reached the end of its usefulness. Castles were great for keeping people out until artillery came along and air bombardment and things like that. So you don't do away with network defenses. They serve a useful purpose, much like having a building with walls and doors and so on does. But you can't rely on that alone. And the volume is massive. HP alone sifts through 2.5 billion with a B events per day. There's huge volumes. So the attacks are slipping past them all the time. And the quick analogy I want to go through is my dad, that one there, used to fly in a Lancaster. In theory, the Lancaster could do over 200 miles an hour, but he said on the way to work with like fuel and bombs and ammunition and crew and so on, it was much slower. It felt more like 100 than 200. And they knew their guns were no match for the 20 and 30 millimeter cannons in the German night fighters. So they wanted to go faster, and everybody wanted to go faster. From the 1910s to the 1950s, a massive technical effort was put into making propeller-driven planes go faster. And this is about as far as they got. The Tupolev 114 can fly at 540 miles an hour. That's very fast for a propeller-driven plane. But that's the technical dead end. And they'd arrived at that technical dead end by the mid-40s. You can't go any faster than that because the tips of the propellers go supersonic long before the plane does. And if you want to go faster, you want to solve that technical problem, you need a different technology. And that's what came up with. And this is the analogy with cybersecurity, that the network defenses are now at or approaching the technical dead end. We need a different type of defense. And I believe it's better web application security. The problem is the money's all getting spent in the wrong places. According to the Open Web Application Security Projects conference in the USA this year, only 1.7% of the cybersecurity budget was spent on the applications, despite the fact 36% of the breaches are coming from the applications, 98.3% spent on all the other stuff. The Ponemon Institute, different sample, but they're still generally the same picture. Around 40% spent on the network layer, and about 15% spent on the applications. And you might think, okay, well, let's just get some scanning tools in to look for vulnerabilities in the code. But in this, the salesman will tell you that works. But this is a study by University of Coimbra in Portugal, and they just compared 4 tools, of which 2 were actually different versions of the same tool. And you can see there's a lot of false positives and clearly a lot of false negatives. And just comparing the 4, only 21 common vulnerabilities found. And there's a more recent study done by a guy called Shay Chen. He's looked at basically every tool in the market, and I recommend before you buy anything, you go and look at his studies, because all the free tools are practically useless, and you don't necessarily get value for money on the expensive tools. If you're a management person, you might like ISO 27001. I'm hurrying here, but I'm going to say it's more of a management placebo. It's a good idea to have a good information security management system, but it's not prescriptive. It doesn't do any details. It doesn't tell me anything about how to test a system for security. In fact, if you apply it cynically, you don't even have to have any security testing at all or any secure development. And if you miss those procedures out, you can still pass the audit every year because you never define the processes. So the constraints we need to work with, we've got a shortage of skilled security staff. So if you're waiting for the cavalry to ride over the hill to the rescue, they're not going to come. The in-house knowledge tends to be in the network security silos. There is a limited budget like everything, but it's being spent in the wrong places. Training is rare. I know that no contractors ever get trained. Knowledge retention is poor from training, often is abstract from the projects when it does happen. Design flaws account for 50% of vulnerabilities, but most testers are passive and don't challenge the use cases. Where's the secure designs? The Massachusetts Institute of Technology Research has identified 700 kinds of software weaknesses, but most developers don't care. Penetration testing is often handled badly, brought in too little, too late. The last week or two of the project, find if the hackers can get in. Well, it's like saving all the testing on a big waterfall project for the last week or two and then expecting you to find all the bugs. You'll obviously find some bugs, but maybe 5 to 25% at best. And I believe the solution is for the project team to take up the slack. We have to learn more about application security and do the work ourselves because nobody else is going to do it for us. And that would mean understanding who are the threats, how are they going to get in, what are the weaknesses, what controls should we put in place, how do we test these controls, and do it by priority of what are they after, what's the technical impact, what's the business impact, prioritize the defenses. Something like SQL injection, very easy to attack. The prevalence is only about 20%, but when it works, if you have the vulnerability, it can lead to a complete host takeover and the destruction of your business, so it's #1 risk. This is the list of the open web application security projects ranking of the top 10. I've described these in a document which you can actually get from me at the end of this presentation. You take my business card and send me an email, I'll send you back the documents, or go into the TDS website, we've got it under the Assure Secure pages. You can get full description of what SQL injection is, for example, breaks down the top 10, how to test for them, and also you need to tell your developers how to build secure systems, because otherwise you're just testing them and yeah, everything's vulnerable. If they're not following secure coding guidelines, for sure they're vulnerable. And you also need to get your designers to be designing securely. Things should fail safely, not providing hackers with loads of information. So in conclusion, I believe knowledge has to get inside the project teams. I think coaching is better than training, or you can try teaching yourselves, etc. But my gut instinct is coaching is better. You need to be challenging in secure designs, be less passive and much more assertive. We need to let developers know security is in scope for testing, because when they know it isn't, which it usually isn't, why would they make building secure code a priority? If they've got other priorities. We don't have to worry about security, nobody's testing for it. We need to separate what we can do now from what you need help with. There's a lot of things we could do if somebody just says these are tests that will make the system more secure, and you already know how to do it. You just need to recognize them. But there's other things like brute forcing the way into a system. That's best done by a specialist using tools, and you should be separating those tasks out. So you're telling the penetration testers, I've tested this, I need you to test that, and then spread the awareness and skills. You need to get knowledge from wherever you can and spread it around so that the whole project team has an understanding of application security. And I'm out of time. Here we go. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan.